Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East, a series of casual conversations that offer up rare insider knowledge and the most important events in the broader Middle East and why it matters to America today. I'm Brian Katulis. I'm Senior Fellow here at the Middle East Institute, and today I'm joined by my friend Toni Verstandig, MEI board member and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, where she focused on not just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but the broader Middle East and trying to create a pathway to peace in the Middle East. And we're going to talk about that today. Before we get to that, a brief message to our listeners. We're excited to announce that Taking the Edge Off the Middle East is launching its own independent channel. After more than a year of being hosted by our colleagues here at Middle East Focus, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Please subscribe, review, follow. Your support makes all of this possible. Toni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
Great to be here. And we're taking the edge off the Middle East with a hot chocolate and a latte with skim milk, right?
You got it.
You can take the edge off in many different ways. And here we are on a blustery Tuesday in April. Let's start out where we are right now. We're about 3 months into the new Trump administration, Trump 2.0. How do you assess how things are going in the big picture? Not only on the Middle East, but also how's it going on foreign policy?
Well, Brian, that's an interesting way to start. I think I would be foolhardy to suggest I have some sense of where things are going. Uh-huh. It is a 2.5 months into this new administration. It's extremely unclear where they're going and what their goals and objectives are. They seem to be changing exponentially. They're influenced by the careening, in my opinion, of the stock market, and it is in a free fall. So I think that rather than creating solid platforms for picking up where the Biden administration left off, and I can assure you that the transition on these issues were seamless, and we saw that witnessed with the Houthi attack, which was something that the closing days of the Biden administration.
And the Gaza ceasefire as well.
And the Gaza ceasefire, well said. So now we're scrambling, trying to figure out, and I think we all are, whether it's the executive branch, they don't have their full team up. Mm-hmm. They were quick to move people around, but now you've lost a lot of the underpinning of, this is the context. In context, especially in the Middle East, but I would suggest national security foreign policy is critical.
Yes.
And it's not present.
Where do you think they're going on the big ticket items? Israel, Palestine, Iran?
I do think the president and his team is deeply committed to the Abraham Accords and looking for, to my understanding, the president is going to be traveling to the region soon. And he is very much wants to pick up and create a pathway toward normalization with Israel. That requires clarity with the Palestinians on Gaza. It also requires the hostages, which release, which with every day that passes is of grave concern. So there are multiple issues, and you can't compartmentalize in this region. Each one is a touchstone to the other. But I think that he has proven he's extremely forceful in his views. He doesn't have the historical context, so maybe he's free from that.
Right. Yeah. So he throws things out there and ideas.
Which will stick.
Yeah. And what do you make of his Gaza Riviera idea in the video and things like this? Do you think it had the impact that some on his team said, that it motivated Arab countries to present their own plan, or what do you think is going on there?
You know what? Maybe slightly. Mm-hmm. The Arab world is anxious for stability.
Yeah.
They want to look at both investment here in the U.S. as well as investment in U.S. investment in the region. Mostly in that regard, it's defense and security. But so I think but the Gaza Riviera has no bandwidth and will not create any positive, in my opinion. I find it rather disturbing. These are people that now the new talking points are, those Palestinians who choose to leave could go elsewhere. And then they're talking about, well, no, maybe the rest of the Palestinians in Gaza should go to Somaliland and so they could live a better. That's just not that's just not possible.
Right. And you don't see the Arab countries, any of them, really rallying around a lot of his ideas.
I think that they are rallying around the idea of normalization. They're rallying around the idea of stability in the region. They're looking over their shoulder in terms of the ever-present Iran issue, which is, as you know, raised yesterday when the president met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's coming fast, and it's coming very fast. So they have, at least if it's accurate, publicly, both Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE said, no, we are not getting involved, which is very different than the coalition that was formed as soon as the first Houthi engagement. But now they're being very clear.
Right.
So that's why we have half of our B-2 fleet in Diego Garcia.
Right. You think that's signaling, or do you think they'll actually conduct a strike?
I think that the president, from what I can only tell you from what I know through people I've actually talked to or what I've read, I don't think this administration wants a Middle East war.
Yeah.
But I'm hard-pressed to get my head around, well, if in fact there might be an Iran engagement, whether we directly engage or we support Israel's engagement, both through additional military assistance, or we are actively engaged, it's not going to be just a one-off and contained and compartmentalized only with Iran.
Yes.
You and I both know Iran is using, and that's what JCPOA was, why didn't criticize for? We didn't focus enough on Iran's support for terrorist organizations, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, et cetera, et cetera. Look, when I was on Capitol Hill, I wrote the legislation that named very specifically how you define terrorist and what should happen, what the next steps are. So it's absolutely clear there's a framework, legislative framework that has not been touched since I was on Capitol Hill. So it's perplexing to me.
We're going to talk about that history and sort of how it's hard to reinvent new things, in part because a lot of these things are set in stone over years by multiple administrations and all of that. But before we get to that, I want to ask you just a couple more on where you think Trump is headed. And I'll do it this way. True or false?
Oh, Brian. Wait, it's morning. He's now, okay, go ahead.
True or false from Tony's perspective? An Israel-Saudi normalization accord can be achieved without meaningful progress on the Palestinian front.
Not possible.
False.
False.
In your view. Yeah.
It's very false.
Why so?
The Saudis have, for the first time in my memory that I've been engaged on these issues, and I suggest you know the same, have been crystal clear that they will not back off. Now, that doesn't mean they might have some quiet engagement with Israel as they've had for a very long time, which I support. That's wonderful. But taking that next step, it is based on a pathway to a two-state solution and clear self-determination for the Palestinian people. They are not budging, and they have been absolutely publicly crystal clear, including Mohammed bin Salman.
Right. And they've become even more vocal in recent months and years as the war goes on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And as the war goes on with absolutely horrific consequences on the ground.
True or false, you can, from a U.S. policy perspective, deal with Iran in isolation of the Arab Israel?
Absolutely not.
Right. I knew the answer there in part because of what you've already said and what we've talked about. But how is it and why is it that in my view, several administrations have had a challenge in dealing with this in an integrated fashion? Because we're going to get to
it is a challenge. Yeah. It is a challenge. I'm not going to disagree that it isn't. But let's remember, I'm going to tragically go back to October 7th. That is ever present in my mind.
Right.
And I continue to feel and will always for the Israeli people and those who, suffered the consequences of October 7th and the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. Let there be no mistake. There's a lot of activity happening in the West Bank. That being said, I think that you have a situation where Iran, October 7th was named Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa is Jerusalem.
Uh-huh.
So let's argue. Well, maybe the Arab world, the particular leaders or countries, while they care about the Palestinians, we both know, not to the degree maybe we think they should be engaged. But let there be no mistake. Their people, their constituents care about Jerusalem.
Yes.
And that there is no equivocation. And for anybody who thinks other, then I will very fiercely disagree with it.
So do you think when President Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, do you think that was a misstep, a missed opportunity, or do you think that was a genuine effort on his part to carve out new territory and blaze a new sort of path to peace?
You know what? I think it was a missed opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
He is a highly regarded business person.
Yes.
Whether it is, and he's very transactional. So anybody who takes that pathway in their profession, you don't give something without thinking about the bigger picture to get something. He gave away the biggest. This was always part of an Arab-Israeli negotiating framework from the very beginning.
It was one of the final status issues, right? You know this inside and out. Yeah.
Without question.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always been an issue. And to dismiss it, no. Did the streets erupt? No. We never knew what the consequence, but now, yes, they have. It just took a longer time.
Now, we're going to get into the lessons from the service you had in government, in particular in the late 1990s, when you were part of the team that worked with Israelis, Palestinians, and regional actors to produce some progress on the Israeli-Palestinian front in the Clinton administration. Last true or false question. That period at Camp David in 2000, true or false, was the closest we ever actually got to an Israeli-Palestinian complete deal?
In the context of where we were, I would say we were very close. But that being said, in order to get to that next step, remember, the context was always about, and the reference, it was the clock.
Mm-hmm.
So were the Palestinians, did they recognize that we were a minute before midnight?
Mm-hmm.
And we were that close? I would argue we went to Camp David without doing the significant briefing that we should have done with our Arab friends and allies that could have helped the Palestinians understand from their perspective, we have your back. Go ahead, take it.
So you didn't build the coalition that you think could have been constructed with Arab partners? I'm trying to understand this.
Too loose, Brian.
Uh-huh.
There were contexts, but it was too iffy. It was too loose. And remember, there was this notion, and look, truth be told, you can look at Sadat in Egypt. You can look at King Hussein, God rest his soul, his grandfather's assassination. This is nothing to fool around. There was this anxiety. If I give in and I sign, the chances of me living are not that great.
Right.
Whether that's true or not, it's what you feel. So in my opinion, when you're doing any kind of negotiating strategy, you have to take into account that other person, their context, and build trust.
Yeah.
So I would have liked us to have more engagement, especially on the Jerusalem issue.
Mm-hmm. And you think this was rushed? And when you look back on this period, and I'm getting into some lessons learned, this was, again, the second Clinton administration. It's not just Camp David. There's many things going on at the time. There's an attempt on the Israel-Syria front.
Which I'd like, we'll talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about that. But let's stay maybe with the Israel-Palestine question at that time and some lessons moving forward. One of your key lessons, just to restate it, is that we should consult with some of our Arab partners more closely to present a much more unified voice about what the real pathway looks like, right?
So remember, it doesn't matter which administration, which time frame, there will always be a political context. And that's the way our government works. That's the way most government works. Remember, we had experienced the Rabin assassination.
Yeah.
And it was unimaginable. In order to move that gigantic next step, get the clock to be synced so that all the interested parties were at a midnight, you needed leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I would suggest that because of we were influenced by the Rabin assassination. And then remember, King Hussein was very ill.
Yes, in the second
And I
term.
brought him, it was my idea to bring him to Wye River
Mm-hmm.
in Maryland. And I sat out with him in this beautiful, in the Eastern Shore, and it was October, and it was beautiful. He was very, very sick, but I briefed him on where we were. He came and met with the small group, the Israelis and Palestinians, and he begged, and he was so eloquent
Mm-hmm.
in his words. This is the time for our grandchildren. That's why we are doing this, for their children. This region is so important to everyone, and the loss of life. It was really powerful and meaningful.
And Wye River was which year? Remind me. Sorry, on your brace. Who was the Israeli leader?
It was Perez.
Uh-huh.
And then it went into Barak. And so remember,
Netanyahu was in there somewhere too.
Netanyahu was Wye River. What am I thinking? Yeah. Netanyahu was Wye River. And in fact...
and that's where he made the demand about Jonathan Pollard.
And let there be no mistake. And everybody forgets this. At Wye River, I remember I sat there and looked as he and the president signed right there in front of this small group, Israel's withdrawal from Hebron.
Yeah.
I.e., it wasn't the place, it was the concept, land for peace.
Yes.
All of a sudden, in today's context, you would never know that. It's gotten shushed under the table.
Yeah.
And and I've talked about this a lot. These are things that they need to be made constant. You need to remind this, especially in the region, and Israel's constantly in changing their administration. And if they're not changing it, they're perilously close to changing it.
Right.
They can't get their budget passed, or,
because of the fractured policy.
And it's deeper now. So I think we have not collectively, those of us who care deeply about this issue, all of us, we tend to forget these small issues, and then the new people pick up, and yes, we talk to them and brief them and are still engaged very, very much, but we're missing some of these big pieces.
Let me ask you this question based on my own experience. When you were doing all of this important work, I was out on the ground with a group called the National Democratic Institute, which is now led by Tamara Wittes. You're on the board of that as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast, I hope. Two things I saw from my vantage point, and I wonder if you feel like this is a fair criticism of U.S. policy at that time. One, what we were trying to do is lift up the voice of the Palestinian people. And at that time, what we saw was a very educated, vibrant, engaged civil society who were seeing an autocratic administration in the Palestinian Authority under Arafat. And there was a disconnect there that the people sometimes felt like their own leaders. And here I'm not talking about the Israeli occupation, I'm talking about the Palestinian. So that was one. And then second, I lived out there in Ramallah, went back and forth between Gaza. And the whole landscape kept on changing with the expansion of settlements. So those are two criticisms. Like when you look at it from that perspective, did U.S. policy do enough, to listen to ordinary Palestinians? Or did we get beholden to the people we needed to persuade to get a deal? And then, sorry if it's unfair, but then second, with what Israel was doing, sort of with the settlement expansions and things like that, was enough done from your perspective?
On civil society, that was something I was deeply involved with. Mm-hmm. And I remember the day that when Arafat, when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, Arafat was going in with his people, Yasser Arafat, Saeb Erekat, his small group. And I mean, it was crazy. So we have this very serious meeting with him. And then the team leaves, and it's me and someone else. And I'm thinking, and when everyone left, I'm thinking, And the secretary said, maybe I should leave a security person here with you. I'm like, absolutely not. The whole idea is for them to see how much we care. I want him to hear me.
Yes.
Well, after they left, I'm thinking, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. However, I did. I think that we get too involved when we're trying to execute on process and not enough on we can make this happen. So to your point on civil society, we could have, should have done more. It was we ceded too much to Hamas, not intentionally. But
Right.
they picked up the whole social network. They were very clever.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Yeah.
Now, Arafat, let's be clear about this, push on security, rightfully so. But we kept saying, you have to, these are all interlinked, and you've got to show your people that you're providing for their daily needs. And we don't do enough on governance and what concerns me and civil society. I'm sure you will remember things like this. We had a gigantic AID project in one of the central areas in Ramallah. Look, all the women would go there after school, and there was a big, it was a big piece surrounded by housing, and their kids would play. And I looked down; they're playing in basic sewage. I went crazy.
Yeah,
came back and said, "This is going to change." I was told, "No, it can't," and I said, "I can't hear you. It's going to change," and it did. But now look where we are, Brian. So as much as you and I both care about civil society and governance and NDI, they are holding on, as is the Republican Institute, given what's happened with the Trump administration.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit.
We have no AID, so you can't, it's like, well, who's going to wave the magic wand? The reality is, we can talk and talk and talk about Palestinian reform. We haven't given them the tools in the toolbox.
And we haven't prioritized it in our policy as well. The second part, the Israeli settlements, because some people...
On Israeli settlements, we can and should have done more. By the time we got really much clearer on articulating our views on settlements, it wasn't enough. And look, facts on the ground are facts on the ground. We're seeing it clearly now.
Yeah. So maybe a few more questions before we carry it forward to the present about back then. I don't want to get into sort of that debate that some of your former colleagues have had about whether it was the Palestinians that should have decided or the Israelis at Camp David, because I think your broader points are, if you want to express your view on it, you don't. Yeah. But your broader points of we should have built a wider coalition with Arab partners. We should have helped leaders sort of pay more attention to their politics and try to lead their people as opposed and to be bold and things like that. When you look at when it comes to leadership, President Clinton, and I know you know him very well, his personal engagement in this and how I was a junior staffer later at the NSC with Ken Pollack and other things, but he was detail oriented. Like, to describe a little bit about all of that.
That's a minor understatement. President Clinton the detail is extraordinary. We had a dinner together. I'm all about policy, but I drill down on the details. And I happened to go and look at the table setting in Arafat and I forgot. I think we were at Y River. And I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Well, obviously, they had put a wine glass in front of Arafat. Whoever was setting the table. I'm like, no.
He doesn't drink.
Well, not only does he not drink, we don't want to be disrespectful. It's the little things.
Yeah.
So we started having, and all these meetings were very, very intense, but having it around a table took some of the edge off. So sure enough, the Israelis raised an issue on X, that was relevant, and they quote the Bible. So for the Israelis, it's the Old Testament. President Clinton, Arafat starts back, goes right back at them. Nope, you've missed sentences 2 and 3. This is what, and he was not wrong. However, President Clinton, he did not have, he always had a Bible on his, Resolute desk, but we weren't there. I was blown away. He goes, wait a minute, all of you. So this passage on such and such, and he starts absolutely to the detail. Afterwards, I said to him, do you have any idea how hard it is to staff you? I mean, I'm reasonably good. I cannot quote and with such determination, but he did it. He established the rapport and relationships.
It was personal.
It was personal. It was personal for all of us. It remains so. And it was very moving to see. He was deeply, deeply committed. I wish we had been able to have more time.
Yeah. So maybe one last question before we carry it forward to the present moment. When you look back on that landscape in the late 1990s and then compare it, here we are in 2025. And not just the Middle East. The Middle East is changing, but also the broader geopolitics. At that time, I would argue America had the wind at its sails. It had won the Cold War. It wasn't involved in yet the Iraq War that went on for 20 years, or the Afghanistan War. 9/11 didn't happen yet. And there was a new era of globalization that some people have said these days have come to an end with these tariff wars. How do you compare and contrast those two eras when you were working on this and trying to drive for peace in the Middle East to where we are right now? And how does that broader environment complicate things today?
Okay. It's a great question, Brian. It really is. For the leadership that we had, whether it was the Israel-Jordan peace treaty, which I was very involved with in establishing which is now not in vogue, but the free trade agreement and the industrial zones, or the Israel-Palestinian, it was all about we mean what we say, and we're saying to our friends and partners, we will stand by you if you take the risks for peace. An example of that with the Jordanians was King needed to show his military. He needed their backing. He also he was not up to speed in any way on his own defense capabilities at the time. He needed a new F-16 squadron. So he went. It was a high priority. I went out to Andrews to meet him, and he flew in, because King Hussein liked to fly. And
he was a pilot himself.
He was a pilot. Yeah, he was a pilot himself. And so I actually, because it was a weekend, had to bring my son with me. And I noticed he was drawing something. So I said, hey, just bring your paper and you can just sit on the runway because they were just about ready to come. I didn't really know what he was drawing. So I'm the first one. I had to greet him. He comes down. King Hussein looks at our son and he gets down on his knee. And I'm like, oh my God, what is he doing? I was like, that wasn't what, you have all the military and everything.
Right.
And he had been drawing. He said, I heard you talking about F-16s. I thought it would be good. He goes, because Your Majesty, I'm drawing, this is what you want, right? It's an F-16. And King Hussein lost it right there. He goes, okay, I'll sign right here. And so this is a good example though, Brian.
From the mouth of babes.
From the mouth of babes. So our colleagues, whether it was NSC or DOD, can't do it. So we don't have the money. And Liz, we were really all in. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting. I actually wrote the Foreign Assistance legislation, Section 60 of the Arms Export Control Act allows for loans. We just do a long loan. And sure enough.
You find a way.
And you have to find a way. You have to it's on the policy, on the substance. And it remains so, whether we were doing, really working assiduously with the Palestinians, with the Israelis. Rabin was extremely supportive. As you know, he had a very close relationship. And then flash forward, when all the parties changed, we continued that.
Yeah.
The issue is, as you and I have been talking about, well, what happens for the next administration, even if it's not a change from Democrat, it's a change, Democrat to Democrat or Democrat to a Republican administration. And I feel we have to do a much better job on focusing on what we did, why we did it, why it happened, and where we are now.
And the handoff on the baton and things like this. And maybe, I want to get it to the current moment, but what are those structures when you think about all that work you did, especially in the 1990s? Excuse me, but then you did a lot of work since then. And we've been partnered on many different things on this to try to create a structure of U.S. engagement for the Middle East. What are those things that still stay, even this period of chaos and a lot of change and USAID is gone and things like this? What are those mainstays that were constructed? Why there's nothing new under the sun in a sense that...
Yeah, I think in terms of where we are right now, I think it is increasingly more important than ever that you have meaningful track two dialogue. And it's not just because we need to reestablish trust. And the trust, it can't just be dialogue. We have to leave conversations in the context of those track two engagement with the clarity of what's the next step and how are we going to execute on it. Because what's happening right now, there is this, the wind is not behind our back.
Right.
It's coming at us full force on many different fronts, and that's an issue. Secondly, I must tell you, I find it interesting on everyone touting how important it is to have public-private partnerships. Well, we had public-private partnerships.
Interesting.
And they are critical. And we actually executed on the ground. And the Palestinians saw that the partnerships, we had private sector engagement, investment, and it was creating jobs. But the tragedy is every time there's a huge leap, whether it was this past October 7th or previously, we had the problem with terrorism.
So one step forward, two steps back. Yeah. But what's a great example of that period of the public-private partnership and why?
Industrial zone.
The industrial zone.
So the industrial zones with the Palestinians, what did they make? They had huge industrial zones outside of Erez on agriculture.
Right.
And they sold their products, because we were very involved with whether it was spices, herbs / spices, extraordinary strawberries or tomatoes. And it required engagement with the Israelis.
Yes.
And you see, it doesn't always have to be public engagement. It's creating those pathways. We did the same with the Jordanians. And the whole idea is we were moving towards that engagement with the Gulf world. And we continued to move that but now, given where we are, it's increasingly more difficult.
What happened to that project in northern Gaza? What's the status of it now?
Well, as of today, I only read, frankly, in the Washington Post, it seems that in order to broaden the space in between Erez and Israel, they basically mowed down all the houses, all the agriculture. There was Coca-Cola factory there that we were very involved and very supportive of, in the entire industrial zone.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Let me carry it forward to close to today, but to about a year or so ago. You and I were at a convening with a group of excellent specialists. They'll remain nameless. All of the partners will remain nameless. But we were looking at one key question, and we were anticipating that maybe, hopefully, and this was a year ago, that there'd be an end to this god-awful war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, and that we had to prepare for, help Palestinians and Israelis prepare for the day after, especially with the focus on governance.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about all of those deliberations. I mean, it was really intense, but in bringing people from Israel, from Palestine, from post-conflict expertise. How do you come up with these ideas? Because none of us were in government, but we had connections to them. What is the value of those sorts of conversations?
I think they are invaluable. I think, as you would feel, our colleagues were very engaged. Our host was all in, and the Israelis and Palestinians who were there saw that.
Yeah.
And remember, there became a time in the last several years, prior to October 7th, where it was in vogue that Israelis didn't engage with Palestinians. Mistake, mistake, mistake. Because you see, it's easier on both sides to criticize the other if you don't engage with them.
Yeah.
Previously, up to, I think the first Trump administration, maybe even a little bit through that first Trump administration, but not much, there was quiet engagement. You have to continue now more than ever. So there's this, And I think we're missing opportunities. Our colleague, Amos Hochstein, did an extraordinary job on the maritime demarcation between Israel and Lebanon.
He was the special envoy in the Biden administration. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you for clarifying that. And what he did was a real opener. Remember, Lebanon and Israel are the only official countries designated to be at war. We need to get through that because that is also an extraordinary economic opportunity. So instead of constantly looking at, foreign assistance and you've got to do, this country needs to, provide X and Y, you would then have an economic pathway that was constant and credible, and we would be behind it to support it. But that's the way it used to be. I don't know where it's going to go now, but the reality is, if we are looking at, in today's reality, remember, as I think you and I were talking before we started, there's a lot of activity going on in the West Bank.
Yeah.
And it is extremely concerning.
Yes.
Nobody's paying as much attention. But Danny Seidman, who is an expert, he's Israeli-American, one of the extraordinary experts on Jerusalem and also the West Bank. He basically is saying that, all of the cantons in the West Bank are now reality because of the roads that are being constructed. Things are, and you keep reading every day, is 4 Israelis were shot at. 5 Palestinian young children died. I'm making this up.
Yes.
Just giving you an example. Died. And it goes back and forth. What is that? It's accomplishing zero. The reality is the Palestinians, we trained the Palestinian security forces, and they have coordinated consistently with Israel. It's the quiet mystique.
Right.
And it's like being disregarded until, unless and until somebody, realizes, oops, we better start really focusing here.
Yeah. But back to this question of what do these groups like MEI, you're on the board of NDI. We've seen in the last few weeks, the U.S. Institute of Peace, the Wilson Center effectively closed by Doge and Elon Musk. And it seems to me, at least, potentially the closing of a chapter of U.S. engagement, U.S. foreign policy. But what value did they add, especially when you look back in that period when you were in the hot seat, when you were dealing with these issues in the Clinton administration?
Sorry, I didn't address that completely. I think that these organizations are invaluable. What you're doing alone here at MEI, and MEI is, in my opinion, becoming MEI 3.0. It's the go-to.
Yeah.
You have been very engaged, as others of your colleagues as well, and I really commend you for it. Requires thinking outside the box and reaching out and saying, wait a minute, and we want, come, and we want you to engage. Right now, it's very easy to say, oh, it can't be done. Nothing can be done. It's exactly the time. NDI, under Tamara Wittes' leadership, is really both not only restructuring under very difficult times, absolutely critical, as you stated earlier. And we have to do more on governance, and we have to look at, and we cannot, I think it's a mistake to rely exclusively on the government. If you have more private sector, more stakeholders at the table supporting organizations, you have more ideas.
Yes.
You have more engagement. And so I like to see philanthropy, both the big philanthropy organizations together with private sector really joining forces and coming up. It's critical. They are going to map the new ideas, the new framework.
And at this stage, though, still early in the Trump 2.0 administration, do you think that the foundations, the philanthropists, are they still sort of in a period of assessing and trying to see where things are going right now? Or do you think people are going to organize and say, okay, even though U.S. government support seems to be cut by Trump for a lot of these things, do you think that there'll be a realization at some point that we need to actually build these things stronger and the tools for U.S. engagement?
I think it's up to us to create that narrative. And we really, in terms of reevaluation, I think everyone is reeling by the not only our stock market, but the global stock market.
Right.
You wake up before you go to bed at night, you check, the Nikkei average. And when you see that it's plummeting, your next morning is not going to be so great. What we're starting to see, especially on the tech side, which is critical for the region. And remember, Israel is startup nation.
Yes.
And Google just had an amazing deal with Wiz in Israel. We need more of that. That's what creates jobs and engagement. In our time, whether it was Clinton, Obama, or even Bush, I did a partnership with Condi Rice. It is about creating that linkage and having the private sector engage. But now it's going to be up to us. And my view is we have a chance to rethink this whole narrative. And I do think that the private sector and major philanthropists and family philanthropy is going to really re-engage more. I don't think we should look to, we need to meet with, the NSC advisor or Secretary of State. I think that's a thing of the past.
Right.
Our engagement is direct engagement with our stakeholders in the region.
When you look at the Middle East itself today, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty. There's violence, potential for more conflict and things like this. Do you see any silver linings? And if so, what are they?
That's a hard one, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the silver lining, we know that the Emiratis are still current. They're anchored. They want to be engaged. That's a given. And I did a lot with the Emiratis. They say what they mean, and their leadership is critical. They're trusted.
Yeah.
You have to go back to the issue of trust, which if you don't engage, then you don't have the trust. I think that the Saudis are not sure. They're a little, in my opinion, it's not, the Saudis are very
They're much more cautious now,
much
too.
more cautious.
Right? Yeah.
And I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. But I do think it requires us to be more creative.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I'm not speaking about the government. I'm speaking about responding to the question you asked me about organizations like MEI, NDI. We have to look. Let's remember governance, democracy that we talk about. Democracy is about security.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the economy. It's about the deliverable. It's not this notion, this pie in the sky notion. It's about the deliverables that anchor any clear-minded government of a country. And it creates pathways for anti-corruption and a connection within a country with their civil society. We have to double down on this.
Right.
We just have to double down. And governance is my thing. I mean, it pays off.
So in a sense, and I've written about what Trump has done to some of these agencies like USAID as unilateral disarmament. But essentially what you're saying is that we've got to fill the space, that all of these other organizations, we've got to figure out ways to assemble new strategies and that we can't afford to just leave a vacuum. If I understand what you said earlier about Gaza and when you went there and all of this, and Hamas in essence filled a space that was there. And if we don't sort of come up with ideas to contribute, then
it's critical.
Yes.
100% agree with you. It is critical. And I know it's tough. I mean, frankly, I even say, I don't know. Can we really make a difference? Yes, we can.
Uh-huh.
And as Secretary Albright used to say, put your big boy boots on or big girl boots and just buck it up and do it.
Yeah.
And she's right.
Yeah.
She was right. And we just in these times when it's so uncertain, that requires us to stand tall and be engaged.
Yeah. No, I'm smiling because you mentioned Madeleine Albright.
Yeah.
I know you were very close to her. And then towards the end of her life, and I worked with her on many projects.
Yes, you did.
But we spent so much time that my wife was a little curious of whether Madeleine Albright and I were.
A lot of us were a little curious, Lion, because frankly, since I traveled so much with her and I look at the calendar, I'm seeing Brian. I'm like, okay, Madeleine, what's up?
What's going on? Yeah. And she was just a dear soul. And
she
she was Secretary of State during that period in that second Clinton administration we've been talking about and all of that. And we need that can-do attitude, I think, even in this time of uncertainty. Yeah.
So look, I also as you know, stood up the Middle East program at Aspen. That's when I did the partnership with, among other things, with Condi.
Yeah.
And I'm on the board of the University of Denver, the Corbell board, and
Yes.
the graduate school. And as you know, Madeline always used to say to Condi, well, we are sisters and we have the same father. We just have different politics. And it was Madeline's father that got Condi involved and interested in national security issues. We have to get voices. We need to get Condi back. We need to get, they've got to take the risks.
Yes.
As I said earlier, are we going to take risks for peace or are we not? And I truly believe the big ideas are going to come from, and we do need, and those who've been engaged, it's Condi, it's Hillary, frankly, Zippy Livni. And
Yes.
you and I were just talking about Ehud Barak's interview with Fareed Zakaria on Iran.
Right.
We have got to find pathways. And in that regard, Madeline had formed a group called Madeline and Her Exes, and I have kept it very much engaged.
That was like David Miliband, people like this, yeah.
Former foreign ministers, and their ideas, and we've, have been invaluable. We meet and you can imagine, push the envelope. We need their voices.
Let me ask you this, though. I agree with you. Where are the former U.S. presidents on this? And is this, and I know it's sensitive, but at particular moments when there was natural disasters in Haiti.
Yeah.
I remember Bill Clinton, President Clinton and George W. Bush and people who are rivals working together. Yeah. Is that an idea at some point, or is it just because everything's so hyper-partisan and ideological and Trump is so unpredictable, people are much more cautious about trying to engage in that way?
I think they are operating under the framework of the way it's always been for formers. You don't get involved in your new administration. You allow your colleague, the new president and his team to engage as they see fit. And I personally think the time needs to come sooner rather than later where they all get together. And but the narrative has to be clear, Brian. And yes. I'm not so sure that there is, although it's now beginning to evolve. I mean, I think you're starting to see both Republicans and Democrats.
Because of the trade wars and step away from global leadership on economic issues.
Let me just mention to you one thing, because Iran is so focused. When I was at Aspen, Condi approached us and said, would you all host a meeting with the Iranians? It was the first and only U.S. government sanction, has not happened since, of Iranians sitting down with Americans, not officials.
Right.
Because I knew if we had official government, it would be a disaster. So I chose healthcare. Health knows no boundaries. The Iranians, we had Tony Fauci, we had some big, heavy hitters.
Wow.
They were stunned at the possibility. This was in the middle of a very, the Bush administration was making real inroads on Iran at that time. And it was really quite amazing. Sadly, two of our participants, the Alei brothers, when they went back, they were arrested.
Yeah.
And it is, I spent the next year plus getting them out of jail.
Yeah. This is the challenge, right?
This is the challenge.
Yeah. And hopefully
you can't be naive about it. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It means we have to be mindful.
Yes. No, and we here at the Middle East Institute engage in all sorts of track twos and have the luxury of actually having candid conversations with counterparts. And that's another force multiplier. It's harder when you're in government because you're bounded by the policies and the restrictions that you have in place. It's easier for us to do things like this. We're almost out of time. I want to get to one last question that I like to ask all of my guests. You've had a terrific career, not only in government, but in the private sector. We're lucky to have you here on the board at MEI, and you're a dear friend. A lot of people look at your career, and younger folks, and say, I want to be just like Toni. I want to do the things that you did in your career. What would you say to them today in 2025? What advice would you give them?
Get involved, take the risk, keep yourself open to new ideas. Maybe you don't know. Look at the Middle East Institute, how, it has evolved, how engaged you all are. It's an honor and privilege to be sitting on the board of real notables who have made a huge difference, including yourself, Brian. I also think don't hesitate to reach out to, especially me. There aren't a lot, I hate to tell you this, there aren't a lot of women in, it was me and the guys until Madeline came.
Yeah.
And then when Hillary was secretary, it wasn't that much better either. So,
Yeah.
And now I can assure you that I don't see a lot of women at the table. So.
Yeah. In Trump's administration, it's a lot of yes men, and yes, they're all men.
And you
a lot of
their courage, reach out.
Yeah.
Say, hey, I don't know if you know. I mean, this is a really difficult time for young people. It's our obligation to be supportive.
Yes.
We need to recruit the next generation that will be engaged and involved and be willing to listen to both sides, not come in with preconceived notions. And I mean, I was privileged when I worked on Capitol Hill. It was and I had a boss that stood by me. It was for some tricky times, but, it makes a difference. And I think, especially since there are so few women, we need to stand up. Tamara has been incredible.
Yes.
She was an extraordinary leader. And so I think we just need to do more of that.
So get out there, experience the world, look for mentors, and especially if they're women. I was thinking about this. Not only do I have you as a friend and a mentor, I wrote a book with Nancy Soderberg. We talked about my special relationship with Madeleine Albright, and I've got a very distinguished wife who does really great things. Yeah. But before I close, I just want to say one other thing. We'll always have Bellagio, Toni. You and I will always have Bellagio, and you and I will only know what that means. A few others. Lee and Kristen.
You are so clever.
I want to thank you for joining us here on the podcast. This was really,
thank you.
We learned a lot. It fits really well with some of our more recent podcasts talking about the Israeli-Palestinian issue with Frank Lowenstein and Dan Shapiro. But thanks so much, Toni.
Thank you for thinking of me. It was great to be here, and I'm really glad to fill in after, as you said, the other podcasts were great, so I'm glad to be on your list. So thanks for thinking.
Thanks, Toni. That's all the time we have for this week. Again, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and to our colleagues for their work on this week's episode. Scott, Athena, Bailey here in the room. We really appreciate all the work you do. You can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about our upcoming events. I'm Brian Katulis. We'll see you all soon.